Greetings, everyone. I want to welcome you to another segment of Beyond the Headlines. I am Glenn Smith. I am the watchdog and public service editor for the Post and Courier. That basically means I oversee the projects team and I report with them as well. Joining me today, we have three members of the projects team. We have Stephen Hobbs, Thad Moore, and Avery Wilks. All have been working with us on the uncovered investigation. And as a special treat today, we have Kayla Green, who's the executive editor of the Sumter Item. She's one of our uncovered partners, and she also was named this year as editor and publishers, one of the top 25 news professionals in the nation under 35. So really happy to have Kayla with us today. Glad she could join us. As many of you know, we're now wrapping up our first year of Uncovered, which is an investigation into questionable conduct by government officials around South Carolina. The project saw us partner with 17 community news outlets, really all around the state, and including the Sumter Item. And the idea was we would share tips and share reporting and share knowledge and work together to produce stories that really exposed a great deal of questionable conduct, dealing, corruption, misdeeds in every corner of the state. Along the way, our partners and us produced around 40 stories and a number of editorials calling for actions to correct some of the problems that we discovered. Okay, Stephen, we're going to start with you today. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went about establishing contacts with fellow journalists like Kayla? Historically, we and our partners have been more like competitors, but for this project, we felt the value of collaboration far outweighed competition. Tell us why that is and how you went about getting others on board. Oh, I think you're muted there, Steve. We do not hear you. Thad, do you want to jump in while he figures this out?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. At least one of us it's working for. Yeah, so I mean, I think I'd be kind of interested to hear Kayla's thoughts on this, but I think the main approach was really to I guess sort of explain why this was different, why, we're not trying to come in necessarily to kind of Bigfoot papers and just steal ideas, but to sort of offer this as a collaboration that had a few different, or could go a few different ways, whether that's, we'll produce a story and you all can run it, or if you want to be involved, basically like trying to match what the capacity is of a given paper. Obviously, there's a lot of variety and diversity in terms of the media landscape in South Carolina. There's some that are, two-person shop, and there's some that are larger and have a bit more capacity. So basically, kind of coming into it with flexibility and explaining that we want this to be a true collaboration, I think was sort of what helped there. I wish you could hear Steven's perspective on it because he actually made that call, but but that was sort of the idea.
We'll get him back for more discussion on that. Sure. And before we go forward, I forgot to mention earlier on that the event is being recorded today and will be sent out afterwards with contact info in case anyone has any more questions for the panelists. Also, if anyone has questions they would like to submit today, they can do so through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. All right, now on to Kayla. Kayla, what intrigued you about the Uncovered concept, and how did you settle on the idea of investigating the problem-plagued water system in the town of Somerton? Can you tell us a little bit about how that story came about?
Yeah, we had been, I had been getting a lot of tips about that specific story for a while. Some of them seemed a little more credible, some of them didn't. But then really when the Uncovered series started getting more of a spotlight, people started reading it, I actually started getting more tips about this specific story, just kind of about pollution and water quality in general. And then so a couple uncovered stories came out, and the number of seemingly credible tips that we could follow up on started to come in more. And I get tips all the time that unfortunately we just, like Thad was kind of saying, I don't really have the capacity to follow up on everything because we have a very small staff. So this is great when y'all came to us and offered this partnership. I was like, yes, this is great. Here's my entire list of things I can't follow up on. So yeah, it was something that I had kind of known about, and grudgingly couldn't follow up on as much as I could. And when this partnership came about, this was one of the first ones that I really thought that it would be good to be able to follow up on.
Okay, fantastic. Do we have Stephen back with us? Can he speak now, or is he still in silence?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Excellent. Okay, why don't you tell us briefly about what you found in this collaboration and how that led to a second story about a horrifying amount of sludge in a water tank that was supplying water to people's homes. Also, why was it so helpful to have the benefit of Kayla and her staff's institutional knowledge and input on that story?
Well, I think one of the great things about collaborating with Kayla on this, and Thad may have mentioned it or not, was we started having regular meetings with her. So not only did we have an initial conversation, but we would say talk every couple of weeks. And that's where we really got to hash out ideas and talk through things. And she passed along things that she was hearing locally. And so when she mentioned, this idea of some concerns about a conflict of interest, water issues in the water system in Somerton, we started talking through like how we could maybe report that out and what were some of the things that she was hearing. And so she was able to connect us with people. We were able to do our own research and found out that there was a council member who worked for the town of Somerton who had a job working for the contractor that was handling water for the town and these other customers on the town system. But he apparently didn't really tell people about that arrangement. And later, when there were these water issues that came about, apparently wasn't telling his colleagues and other people about some of these issues that were happening. And so there were certain disclosures that he wasn't making with the State Ethics Commission that we all kind of found out after the fact. So really there were a couple things about the story. Was one, people were really concerned about their water and the impact it was having on their health. But then there was also an official who maybe wasn't disclosing as much as he maybe should have been or could have been in this situation. And so we thought that was an important thing to look into. And as part of that, we found out that there was a new water operator that came in who then found, okay, there were these issues across these systems. And that's when we came across this issue about a water tank on one of the systems.
And if I remember, if I can jump in real quick, I think one thing that happened with that was, so this new operator had this like laundry list of problems that he identified across the systems that Somerton owns. And there was like this one, it's pretty dry, the report, but there's one little line that says this one water tank hadn't been cleaned in at least 12 years, which is like, as a non-water operator layman, that was sort of striking. And I think Kayla, I mean, to the point of the value of the collaboration, if I remember correctly, Kayla, you all were getting calls and had been to a town council meeting where the people who lived in that community said, we'd featured this other community near Somerton, and they were like, well, we actually also have problems. So that's sort of where that collaboration came in and was really valuable.
Good point, that. Yeah, Kayla, to that point, what benefits did you see from this collaboration? What was it like to work with a pair of outside reporters, and how did it help you to have their assistance in digging into all this? Conversely, why is that local perspective that you all bring so important to telling the story in its proper context?
Yeah, I mean, to be quite frank, without this collaboration, these stories just wouldn't happen, and no one would know what was going on. We wouldn't be able to uncover this. we can get these tips and we can kind of look into it. We can go to council meetings. But, without the resources and the just having that team atmosphere of I'm not just working on this alone, or I don't have any other reporters who can work on this, because we have to, our very small staff has to put out a paper every day. So we can't have a reporter right now, unfortunately, spend time to investigate one story and not write something every single day. But that's a really valuable asset to have. And, to be able to use that and Stephen's expertise in how they can investigate stories and their knowledge of going through the FOIA rules, just it wouldn't have happened otherwise. So it was really valuable to me to be able to work with them. And again, having those weekly calls, I think, was really helpful, because it is kind of a weird situation at first, or it was weird at first. Partnering up with people who we don't work together every day, we didn't know each other beforehand. That kind of odd aspect of, normally I guess we would be competitors theoretically. But, if we don't have the resources at the item to be able to make these stories come to fruition, then what's the point in competing? We might as well collaborate so that they can happen. So that was very valuable too.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too, with like a lot of these project stories. Probably non-journalists wouldn't understand, but I mean, you start digging into these things and you have piles and piles of documents and all these tips, and that sort of thing could be just really daunting. And I've always found it helpful to have somebody to work on it with. So when I start getting discouraged, somebody pick you up, and you can do the same for the other person, because these stories take time, and sometimes it looks so daunting that you can easily talk yourself into just running and covering something with more immediate gratification to it. And the other point is too, coming into a community, say we got this tip about Somerton and we rolled in there, sort of parachuted in. We don't really know the town very well at all, right? We don't know who the people are to contact there, and you all are there every day, so you really understand what it's like on the ground and the history there. And I think those parachute stories often lack that proper context and insight that you might get. Thad, can you tell us a little bit about what the impact of the Somerton story has been?
Yeah, so the main impact is that after the initial story about the town councilman's ties to the water contractor, after that came out, we found out that that SLED, the state law enforcement division, had opened an investigation into him. There's not a lot of detail that is at least public at this point, but our understanding is that it's like an ongoing investigation. It's kind of interesting. I mean, there's a kind of parallel or also ongoing investigation into just sort of the overall water problems and how that came about. I mean, some of the things that the new operator found included, for instance, falsified paperwork, or there's a lot of talk about falsified paperwork. They actually found a logbook where this log had been filled out. I forget what day they came, but let's say they came on March 1st. There was an entry already for March 2nd when they got there. So that was suspicious. So there's another investigation that kind of was ongoing as we were reporting the story out. That's by DHEC and the EPA, and we're still waiting for the results on that as well. So I don't really know what the result of either of those investigations will be, but I think, I mean, really the point of Uncovered is to bring more attention to issues in these communities that aren't getting enough attention. So in that way, I feel pretty good about the impact that the story had in that regard.
Okay. Stephen, we've been involved in a number of, like I said, we've had 40 some stories between us and our partners. What are some of the other impacts we've seen across the state from these uncovered pieces?
Yeah, so there's been some calls by legislators to kind of have greater oversight for these districts, special purpose districts that they're called, that Avery has written about, and so kind of creating more heightened scrutiny of those government entities. And then also Governor McMaster called for closing of loopholes, ethics loopholes that were really revealed and shown in the first story of the series, talking about kind of travel by gas authority officials in the state. And so those were some early kind of calls and action that happened. And then also after a story that another colleague did about a governor's school for agriculture in the state, there was some issues with conflicts of interest, kind of ethical breaches there that were written about. And then some state officials came after the fact, including the inspector general, kind of confirmed that there were some purchasing rules that were not followed. So those are some kind of key things that we saw in very high levels of government.
Okay, thanks. So those impacts that we're seeing, it's one of the key reasons we've decided to keep Uncovered going for at least another year. We've still got a pretty healthy pile of tips to go through, and despite having our staff and the partner staff chipping in, it's a lot of work to do. So we're going to be keeping a very close eye on this, and we're at the same time we're going to be keeping a close eye on the legislature to see how they address or don't address some of the issues and problems that we have identified. Avery, you've done a great deal of reporting on the gaping loopholes in our State Ethics Act and the challenges faced by the commission that enforces that law. Can you tell us about some of those challenges and what we might expect in the coming session to bring about reforms?
Yeah, so, the State Ethics Commission is supposed to be one of our most powerful watchdogs for corruption and abuse of power by public officials in South Carolina. But really throughout our reporting over the past couple years for Uncovered, we kept noticing problems with it and how it enforced the law and how it investigated alleged misconduct. And so many of our stories included some sort of tie-in with the Ethics Commission, whether the agency didn't notice something going on in a small town, or it did, didn't fully investigate a mischievous board member, or it did investigate and a council member still got away without scrutiny on a technicality. And so I started attending those Ethics Commission hearings just to sort of see what was going on over there. And most often I was the only person in attendance from the general public. So over the course of our investigation, we just found that it's an agency that, operates mostly outside of public view. Its investigations aren't always extremely thorough. And that's in part because it only has a handful of investigators who field more than 100 complaints a year and have to monitor, hundreds of public officials, thousands really across the state. And often those officials escape scrutiny and punishment in those cases because the Ethics Act is riddled with gaping loopholes that excuse wrongdoing and give politicians the benefit of the doubt in those investigations. And even when the Ethics Commission does punish them, it really can't enforce the fines that it doles out. There are hundreds of current and former public officials, failed political candidates, lobbyists, and special interests who owe nearly $3 million in fines to the Ethics Commission, but simply refuse to pay, and the commission doesn't really have the power to make them. A few dozen of those are sitting public officials who continue to get reelected, even though they're refusing to pay those fines. So with all that said, we have exposed a lot of problems systemically with the State Ethics Commission and how it enforces the state ethics laws. I think you'll see some movement in the 2022 legislative session to sort of beef up the Ethics Commission to make it stronger. And that could take a number of forms. It could mean revising the Ethics Act to close some of the loopholes that defendants can skate through. It could mean more funding to the Ethics Commission so that they can hire more investigators and spend more time looking into allegations of misconduct. And it could also be some really simple fixes, like barring public officials from running for re-election until they pay their ethics fines. Fixes like that would make the Ethics Commission's punishments more real, and that would make public officials kind of respect the agency more than they seem to do now. A few of those ideas have been filed at the State House already, and their sponsors have said that since we've been writing our stories, there's a little bit more momentum behind those ideas now, and they'll be able to sort of use these stories as a way to illustrate the problems that we have in South Carolina. So it'll be interesting to see to what extent some of those ideas can gain momentum in the coming year.
So, we have exposed a whole bunch of things here, but at the same time, people have known for years that the Ethics Act has not been as strong as it could be, to put it generously, I guess. Any idea why there's been reluctance at the State House to address some of these issues in the past?
You make a good point that people have known for years, and there hasn't been much done about it. But it's similar to the Post and Courier's big education story a few years ago. Like, people have, if you've lived in South Carolina, you know inherently that our education system is broken, that it's failed for years. That lawmakers haven't done too much to fix it. But until the newspaper put out this series, sort of really laying out all the problems and how they affect businesses in the state and could affect commerce moving forward, and how many kids aren't ready for to go to college or to start a career when they leave high school. Just putting all of that out there in stark detail can sometimes be the jump start, what kickstarts the legislature into action. By virtue of all of the issues they have to juggle in a given year, right now, COVID-19, they've been dealing with a lot of social issues like abortion, education reform. They have a lot on their plate, and they're sort of a beast of inertia. You kind of have to get the ball rolling, and then eventually it picks up steam, but it might take a good bit or a big story or some really bad example in order to get that ball rolling. And, hopefully that's what we've got here with Uncovered. It still kind of remains to be seen. But it's going to have to take sort of some grassroots efforts, I think. Lawmakers always tell me when I ask why they don't do more about ethics, that voters don't blow up their phones about ethics. It's not a sexy issue. It's kind of complex. It's kind of uncomfortable to talk about for lawmakers. And so there really needed to be something that sort of started to push that ball down the hill, and get it moving. And we'll see in the upcoming session whether Uncovered has been enough to do that. And really it'll be a test of whether lawmakers in South Carolina care about this, because at this point they can't say that they're unaware of some of the major problems we have here in South Carolina.
Great, that's a great summary. And I'll make a plug too. Avery mentioned the education issue and what happened to reform there. If you haven't read it, the story this weekend by our colleagues Jennifer Hawes and Shauna Adcox is a really great behind the scenes look at how that education reform issue sort of went, became this giant thing and then ran out of steam pretty quickly. Another thing we've been talking a lot this year by virtue of Uncovered is really the importance of local community newspapers. And South Carolina is fortunate. We just have one true news desert in Allendale County, which hasn't had a newspaper since 2015. But we also lost eight papers in 2020. And a lot of other papers are struggling around the state. And I wanted to ask Kayla, why is it so important, in your opinion, to have community newspapers in the state to follow these sorts of issues? And what can people do to support newspapers like The Item in carrying out this mission?
Yeah. Again, to put it really bluntly, without newspapers, without any of us, more and more of these types of stories that Uncovered is writing about, they're just going to keep happening. And it gets easier for people and for officials to, kind of do whatever they want in the dark. If there's people not going to meetings, if there are people not looking into what they're doing. And so in order to prevent us from having to come back in and then investigate what has already, the corruption that has already happened, if community newspapers if they continue to be around, then maybe we can prevent that from happening in the first place, or be able to shine a light where that is happening. And, not, getting out of the Uncovered topic, community newspapers tell stories of people and their neighbors that are doing things every day, outside of council and outside of elected officials. They tell stories of what not just of what school boards are doing, but, what kids are doing inside of schools and what's happening on sports teams, and about new local businesses and how to support the people all around us. So a lot of these stories, like, for example, that we do, we might not have an investigative reporting team at the item, but we tell stories that without us every day, those stories would never be told. And people want to know what's happening, not just, in the state house, but they want to know what's happening next door, and they want to know what's happening inside of their schools. And we're able to tell those stories every day. So to help support that, you get a subscription to the item, to the Post and Courier. Support Uncovered, support your local newspaper. We all need support financially in order to keep going. So yeah, just whether that's advertising local or buying a subscription or continuing to give us tips, anything that you can do to help support in your way is much appreciated.
Excellent. Okay, I think we're ready to take a couple reader questions here. One that came in, this is a really interesting one. How has looking at corruption with a statewide lens impacted how you see individual acts of corruption and influence peddling in South Carolina? Who wants to handle that?
I would sorry.
No, go for it, Avery.
I would just say that one thing we noticed, and maybe this is what Thad was going to say, but if not, feel free to add on after me. But if we found an issue in a town like Chester, often it turned out to be a statewide issue affecting other places. One of the things that we really tried to do, and I think we're pretty successful in, is trying to universalize these stories and show that if you're reading this story in the Sumter Item or the Greenwood Index Journal, but it's a story about a fire department in Simpsonville or a city councilman in Chester, the story may not be about your city councilman or your fire department, but it does show these flaws we have regarding overseeing special purpose districts, or regarding whether we actually do background checks on council members to see if they are eligible to vote or eligible to run for office before we put them on the ballot. So in a lot of the stories that we ended up running, these big investigations, they may have been focused narrowly on one place, but we often found that they were issues that affected lots of communities like them that have sort of the same conditions. There's not a major media market, or there's not, there's a dearth of state oversight and other types of watchdogs. So that was one thing that really struck me early on, and it continued to be a theme throughout.
Okay. Another person asked if we intend to look into corporate and business foul play and misconduct as well in 2022. I would say that Uncovered is centered on government, pretty much. We're looking at public officials and their betrayal of the public trust and their either wise management of public money or mismanagement of public money. But we were always willing to accept any tips that come in, and whether we can do it or our business staff, or there's plenty of other reporters, and we could also provide tips to our partner papers to look into. So if you got tips about any sort of bad deeds, regardless of the entity, send them our way, and more than happy to take them. Let's see what else we got here. I'm going to ask this one of Avery. Who appoints the chair of the Ethics Commission, and how long are they in this position? How long has the Chairperson Thrasher been there?
I'm not sure how the chairperson is elected or appointed, but the commissioners themselves are appointed by the governor, the House, and the Senate, and both political parties get to elect the members. So you'll have House Democrats get to put a person on, House Republicans, Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans. I'm actually not sure who decides which of them is the chairperson. But that's something I can look into.
The other thing too, another follow-up question here is, I see the Ethics Commission goes into executive session almost every meeting. How is this transparent information to the public, and how ethical is that?
It's not transparent. So that's a good question. I don't know how ethical that is, but Certainly one of the more frustrating things about covering any public meeting is when, and there seems to be more and more of a tendency of this these days, when bodies will go behind closed doors to discuss the public's business. And the Ethics Commission, routinely does this. Often their decisions are actually made behind closed doors. They don't actually vote on whether to punish a person in person, in public. So it's frankly, it's not a very transparent state agency, which I view as a problem, as someone who's looked into them for more than a year. And I think the agency could do a lot more to let the public know when it discovers misconduct. It does a lot of these investigations, and people just never find out that their council member is under investigation, that their local official has been fined or received a warning. So it certainly is an agency that could use a much more transparent online system as well as some of the meetings.
Okay. Another person asked if we're seeing an increase in tips as a result of Uncovered. I don't know, Stevie, you want to handle that? Are you seeing a lot of tips?
Yeah, I think definitely just when we think of the amount of tips that we have, we've compiled kind of a spreadsheet of story ideas that have come in, and there's always things that maybe trickle in, but that seems like it's been more steady. And I think what is great is, like kind of Kayla mentioned earlier, we're seeing tips come off of stories where someone reads one of the earlier stories and then they say, well, you should really look into this. And so I think it's not just the amount of tips, it's like the momentum of tips that having these stories roll out throughout the year, I think encourages people to come to us with more information. So that's been really great to see.
Okay. Yeah, I know at one point, I can't remember how many tips we had at last count, but I think it was well over 60 or 70. And, in some cases too, even if the tips don't pan out always, people have suspicions. I mean, we can, part of the value of doing this is to find out when things aren't there, right? I mean, we found a number of things that have been, but I think if you can get to the bottom of it and find that things aren't as nefarious as they look, that there's some value in that too. Okay, it looks like we are getting down to the final moment here. So I'm going to thank everybody for turning out today. And thanks for watching. Remember, you can sign up for any of our free newsletters at postingcourier.com/newsletter-sign up. If you're a subscriber, we'd like to say thank you as always. If you're not a subscriber, you can sign up at postingcourier.com, subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. And I would highly encourage you to go check out the Sumter item and see what really wonderful work Kayla and her staff are doing there. So thanks, everybody. Have a great holiday.